Welcome, my name is Sheila Cook. It is the 2nd of December, 2022, and I want to welcome all of you. We are recording this session, and if you have questions that you would like to pose, you can use the chat. If you look at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar, you can click on chat and type in your questions, and we will have plenty of time at the end for your questions. Now I'm going to turn it over to Christopher Cook.
Thank you, Sheila, and hello, everybody. It's a delight for me to just set the context for this presentation from Carl Calleman. And Carl, I want to thank you for joining us here today. I know that you're on the other side of the world from us here in the UK. You're in New Mexico. But as you can see from the slide, everybody, the topic of today is a new theory of our origins. And I could wish for no one better than to stimulate our thinking than Carl as he does this. Here we have somebody who I've known for over 18 years. We used to present together in many of the roadshows that we did in the United States in that period. But if I was to summarize Carl, here's somebody who's listened to the whispers of his soul and has been studying and exploring this topic and allowing his awareness to expand for over 30 years. What you also have in this conversation is a fastidious scientist who has provided the links, certainly in my reading of his work, between the hard biological realities of what we can see in today's world in an increasingly finite way, but linking it to the grander scheme of how this universe functions. So Carl, I'm so delighted that you're here today to join us. And Carl is going to speak for about 30, 35 minutes, and we'll squeeze as much of his presentation in as possible, and then allow plenty of time for questions. And as Sheila says, the chat is there for you to post questions or comments right the way through Carl's presentation, so we can have a rich conversation towards the end, and we'll allow at least 15 minutes for those conversations towards the end of the session. So enough from me. Carl, if you're ready to go, I'd like you to kick back with your feet in the sand, and I look forward to hearing your presentation. Thank you.
You're muted, Carl.
Carl, we'll need you to unmute. Here.
Good.
It was a great start, Carl, but you have to start again.
Okay. Well, thank you, Christopher, and thank you, Sheila, for hosting this seminar, which gives me an opportunity to present my most recent book, The Living Universe, a new theory of our origins. And this is really a way of presenting an understanding of our origins that, based on much of modern science and the data it has accumulated, still does not accept the materialist philosophy that underlies everything that modern science presents. In other words, it usually tries to present our reality as a result of random changes of matter. In this particular presentation, I will present an alternative, which is all about the evolution of consciousness as being the underlying factor in all forms of evolution. And oh, now I run into this. It's not moving. Let's see.
Oh, there you go. You got it.
Okay. Okay, so fundamental questions then sometimes people ask are, what is the origin of the universe? Why does anything exist at all? And that may be a question I will not be addressing. It's a little bit too deep, but certainly I will be describing the origin of the universe in a new way and do so in my new book. And as part of that is the question, what is the origin of life? And there again, we have the mainstream of science saying that life appeared first by an accident, a DNA mutation or a sequence of DNA mutations, and which is really based on the Darwinist idea that evolution is a random phenomena. And that is something that I certainly am addressing very critically in my own book here. Why are we here? Well, you know, if everything is a random accident, well, there wouldn't be any reasons to be here. And that points to a very negative consequence, I think, that materialist science has had, which is to present life as having no purpose, no meaning, or any kind of larger context of our existence. Now, so how do you break out of this sort of framework that modern science has created? And to me, it has been necessary to consult with the ancient sources and ask the question, have we missed something on our way? Is there something we need to add in order to get this fuller picture of the universe as being a living entity driven by evolution of consciousness? And this, I have primarily found this ancient influence that I think we need. I have primarily found among the ancient Maya. And so I need to talk a little bit about the kind of calendar system that the Maya developed, especially since this, I think, has been misinterpreted quite profoundly by many different sources. But if we go to what is now considered one of the 7 wonders of the world, which is the plumed serpent pyramid in Chichen Itza, that very pyramid tells us important things about how the Mayan calendar system works and how our world is created by it, literally speaking. So if you look at this particular pyramid, you can see that it's not a smooth pyramid, it's a terrace pyramid built in 9 different levels. And these different levels actually corresponds to 9 different states of consciousness. What we can also see from this particular picture, which I took at spring equinox, is the plumed serpent itself. At the bottom of the left-hand corner of the picture, you can see the head of this plumed serpent. And then on the side of the staircase, you can see a sequence of 7 triangles going into that head. And this emanates from the top of the house, or the top of the pyramid, which is considered as the center of the universe. In other words, in this view, the center of the universe sends out, emits different waves or serpent-like phenomena that actually then happen in 9 different levels. And it's actually then a cut in stone for everyone to see a quite simple and yet very profound shift in how we may understand our reality. To begin with, the 9 different states of consciousness actually correspond to different macrocosmic quantum states. And macrocosmic quantum states are phenomena unheard of in modern science. Modern science only presents microcosmic phenomena. In other words, because it has such a reductionist bias, it fails to see that also on a macrocosmic, on the scale of the entire universe, there are quantum processes, wave processes going on that is actually the most important when it comes to how our reality is shaped and the origin of this particular universe. And this, I remember when I first came to Chichen Itza, I was 29 years old and I was a graduate student at the University of Stockholm, and not in archaeology at all, but in physical biology. And I couldn't understand why would these people have worshipped a snake? It didn't make sense to me. But it turns out when you look at their sources, they looked upon this as the most important deity of all. So here I have a quote from the Popol Vuh, which is considered like the Bible of the Maya. And what it says is that the other gods, the heart of sky, came to the plumed serpent, who was the sovereign deity, you might say, and decided how life would be created. So it's actually the most important deity in all of the Mesoamerican cultures. Now, it's not only the Mesoamerican cultures that have worshipped these serpents as creator gods. If you look at this picture, for instance, to the upper left, you have the world's oldest known piece of art from Botswana in southern Africa, which shows a serpent. And we do know that the Bushmen still honor a serpent as a giant creator. And then we have the rainbow serpent in Australia as the creator god. And in addition to the plumed serpent, but also everybody has heard that, before Christianity, before Judaism took a new form, I would say, they honored a serpent connected to the tree of life. And if we add to this, we go to, the Nagas in India, and in China. It's interesting to see here the similarity between these two pictures, where the under parts of the bodies are both serpentine. And in China, Fuxi and Nuwa were like the legendary creators of civilization, and they brought the tools of civilization. Here, Fuxi holds a square and Nuwa a compass. These are orienting factors that are necessary in order to create civilizations. But the point here I'm making is that all over the world, there was a time, if you go back to before 500 BC, people worshipped serpents as the creators. And it got lost, you might say, and that's another kind of story. But what this means is that I suggest we can't just dismiss this as some kind of superstition or something like that. Rather, we are missing something. We, the modern world, is missing something if we truly want to understand how the universe is created. And what we're missing is this wave movement of creation. Because what I'm suggesting here is that what the ancient peoples were describing as serpents are actually macrocosmic quantum waves. And those waves were actually what brought life, what brought civilization, and brought the tools of civilization, as the mythology of Fuxi would imply. Now, there is one reason, though, to focus especially on the Maya, and because they are providing us with the numbers. If you want science, you have to have numbers, more or less. And only if you have numbers as to how these different ways would evolve, can you actually tell something about whether these ideas, these wave-like creation movements actually are true or not. So what I'm showing here are the 9 waves that we saw on the pyramid of Kukulkan, but also that each one of them has a particular wave period, which implies also a particular frequency. And then to the right, you can see that these different waves are activated at specific points in time. And usually when there is some kind of a shift, when a new such wave is activated, you can actually see in the history of our planet and actually of the universe that something happens. So for instance, if you look at the sixth wave here, you see 3115 BC is the time of its activation. And we know this is the time when the first civilizations appeared on our planet. Civilizations with city life, pyramids, etc., etc. 1755, you can see that that's the time when industrialism started on our planet. And you could take the eighth wave, 1999, as the time of the digital revolution. So revolutions in human being, you might say, are connected to the activation of these different waves. And in ancient times, if you go to Mesoamerica again, you know, they looked upon these waves as carrying, by being dominated by particular deities. So meaning that each peak, which I'm calling a day sometimes, or each valley, which I'm sometimes calling a night, will be characterized by a particular deity, the energy of that particular deity. And if you look at this picture, you will find that the times that are peaks are usually more forward-going. They're bringing new phenomena into existence, they make humans create new realities and so forth. And whereas in the nights, that's the opposite. Usually there are gods of death or destruction, or at least resting, that are dominating those time periods. So here we have an easy explanation as to why in history, you know, civilizations have risen and fallen and gone up and down, and we're still essentially subjected to these kind of wave movements. And it's also an evolutionary process. If you look at that line that goes from sowing to fruit, it goes through a number of steps, so that what starts with the first day here, it's sort of completed with the seventh day. Oh, now I'm having, what's happening now?
Okay.
Oh, okay, yes, okay.
There you go.
Okay, yes, I should use another way of changing. Okay, so in this model, I look upon the plumed serpent as a carrier of consciousness. It's not matter that is being wave-like developed in our planet. It is actually that the consciousness evolves according to a wave movement. And that, you know, brings us to ask the question, you know, what is consciousness? Which is something that is hotly debated in science today, because it is one thing that really cannot be fit into the materialist philosophy that dominates it. And my preliminary definition is that consciousness is that which creates an experience of an inner world as separate from the outer. That's very preliminary, but that's how I start my book, and I prefer to have the reader go along and see how we can expand on this and make it more tangible. But it's important to, I think, to really go back to some of the luminary pioneers of quantum theory, who were not as materialist as modern scientists actually are, and see what they said. Max Planck, the father of quantum theory, and then it is only limited to microcosmic theory, I should add. What I'm bringing to the party here is the macrocosmic dimension. But even so, Max Planck says, I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. that's very, very strong words. It means that consciousness must have existed before matter. And so it's completely different from what the kind of Big Bang theory that we're being told in schools and so forth. And then we have Erwin Schrödinger, who developed the Schrödinger equations and the orbital theory and so forth. And he says that consciousness cannot be accounted for in physical terms, for consciousness is absolutely fundamental. Now, what that means is that if it cannot be accounted for in physical terms, it is not something that we could ever fully describe by our instruments or our senses, because it's fundamental to those material that made these instruments or made our own senses are based on our own physicality, so to speak. And Schrödinger says consciousness, it cannot be accounted for in terms of anything else. So that changes the whole picture. Then these two, if you just follow what these two pioneers of quantum science were saying, it's fully meaningful to develop an a model of the evolution of the universe as a result of the evolution of consciousness, and not just being matter happening randomly here or there, or what the dominating viewpoint is of science. So then, I should, this picture again, it connects a little bit to show that, at least when we look at the higher levels of the pyramid, there are different states of consciousness. Each of these states of consciousness, you can see there to the right, and then they are activated at the corresponding time points. And we'll come back to the human consciousness later. We will start by looking at the impersonal consciousness evolution. But what I might have needed to add it when I talked about the pyramid or the plumed serpent previously is that in this whole view, the evolution of the universe is a result of a climb of different states of consciousness, each carried by a particular wave, until reaching the top level, which is the 9th wave. And as you can see on the lady who is then portrayed as having that state of consciousness, there's no geometry, there's no filter, so to speak. It is sort of a potential unity state of consciousness that is being attained at the top, the resulting of the climb. And as you might understand, I think I already hinted at that, each of these states of consciousness will bring a different kind of a world. They're different worlds. There was, say, for instance, if you go back to the 5th wave and the kind of unity consciousness people were in there, you come to the pre-historical era, when people were much more unified with nature and the divine and so forth. And then comes another 6th world, which is basically the world of civilizations, the 7th world, which is the world of industry, and the 8th wave that we so much experience today, which is the world of the digital world. So the point is to see that this pyramid that they made, and several other countries or traditions have 9-level structures like this to symbolize it, that it is actually means the activation of different worlds. But now we should go more into what is the real meat of the matter of this book, and really go into the whole question of the origin of the universe, the origin of life. And because we have from the Maya we have the exact timing of these different wave movements. And here I'm showing the first wave that started 16.4 billion years ago. And a particular wave period here is very long, it's 2.5 billion years. But because we have that, we can sort of see how does what we know based on the modern science database, how does that fit with the various shift points here? When as I said earlier, when a peak is activated, it usually means that something new is created and comes into existence. Look at this wave then, the most basic of the 9 waves, the one at the bottom of the pyramid. And first you see then that the higher cells they emerged about 1.3 billion years ago, as we know. And that corresponds very well with the beginning of the 7th peak. And then we have another date, which is the first life on Earth, which is much simpler kind of cells, more bacterial cells. We know them to have emerged 3.8 billion years ago. And so we have a very good match, a very good fit here if we look at the end of this particular wave, as we can understand it as a wave that is actually creating the most basic forms of life. Now, then, if we go back, we find that the Big Bang, which is usually always on the internet and by all scientists and so forth, is called the beginning of the universe. And it fits very well. Now it's considered to be 13.8 billion years ago that the universe emerged. So it fits very well with this particular wave movement. And to be, a first observation we might make then is that both the emergence of the first cellular kinds of life and this so-called Big Bang go into the same wave movement. What that, in other words, means is that it seems to be, the emergence of life seems to be a part of the creativity of this particular wave. And that the Big Bang is not just some kind of a material explosion, but actually something that prepares for the later emergence of these cells. So if you believe in what I'm saying here, then life has not appeared here as an accident. Actually, it is meant to exist because it is part of this wave movement. Now, a second thing that I had to deal with for a long time is the fact that there is a wave period between 16.4 billion years and 13.9 billion years before the Big Bang, before this, what I should call the explosion of matter, which is a simple way of putting it. So maybe the beginning of the universe is not this explosion of matter. Maybe there is this wave seems to point in another direction. And only if we account for that other wave period will we be able to also see how these simplest forms of life emerged as part of a wave. So why should we be surprised if the ancient Maya would say that the plumed serpent was the bringer of life? This is exactly what it looks like. And then we go to the second wave, and that sort of adds to it. It has a higher frequency, as you might say. So each period here is just about 126 million years long. But there you have the development not only of simple singular cells, but the development of multicellular organisms, animals, as we would call them, leading up to the final seventh peak, which is the mammals, which is what we belong to. But you can see there is a stepwise development to more and more complex forms of life. And at one point, when you come to the fifth step there with the reptiles, you have the transition to land and so forth. And so not at all does it look like life is a product of random processes. It all seems to be fitting with these wave movements that, you know, I emphasize the Maya because they are the only ones that gave us the time periods for it. But actually, I would say pretty much the entire world prior to, say, 2,500 years ago would have a belief that creation was brought about by serpents. So step by step, more and more complex forms of life have emerged. And then I shan't go into more detail, but as you can see, then there is a third wave that brings up to an upstanding bipedal species, and then eventually it goes through the various forms of humans, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, eventually ending up with the Homo sapiens. So wave movements and sometimes the matching of these emergencies of new species are just perfect when it comes to how they match with the waves and their peaks and valleys. And, you know, who actually believes that life is an accident? But nonetheless, that is the central dogma of current neo-Darwinism. Life is an accident. And I want, in my book, obviously, I spent some time of creating a criticism of the Darwinist view. But one thing I just want to show here is the fact, the number of genes in different species. You know, according to the Darwinist dogma, the idea obviously would be that the more DNA a species would have, the more complex would it be. Or if you turn it the other way around, a complex being like a human being should have much, much more genes than, say, a nematode, which is, you know, the little silverfish you can see in the bathtubs and so forth. As it turns out, when you look at the bilateral animals, this is not true. Basically, they all have the same amount of genes, meaning that the DNA probably has nothing to do with creating more complex species. And most dramatically, you might say there is a nematode. And these are so simple animals, which actually has more genes than a human being. So there is something wrong in that central dogma of biological science, the idea that the species came about as random mutations acted on other species. So, but that's a little bit too outside of this. But then, you know, if we looked at this here, and there is some period in here, and then you can see there are a couple of peaks that I can't attach any activations to, anything, because they happened out in the cosmos. The Earth did not yet exist, and so there is no fossil record of anything that might have happened before 4.5 billion years ago. And but what I'm suggesting is that really this is the origin of the universe. And here you can see that I have actually put in some things, and they are proposals, you might say, especially in the first period, the one 16.4, 13.9 billion years ago, which is what happened before the the Big Bang. And actually, I think there's a lot of preparatory things going on before this explosion that sort of prepared it. And I talk a lot about that. That's actually what I'm most proud of in this book is for instance, explaining what is dark matter, explaining what is how the constant of nature was fine-tuned for the emergence of life, and several other things like explaining the origin of the so-called axis of evil that I'll come back to shortly. But what I'm saying here is that 2.5 billion years ago, that's really when you have the activation of consciousness and its connected space-time. And then there is a period, a gestation period of the universe that we know nothing about really when it comes to the details. And that preceded the birth of the universe in the first matter, helium and hydrogen. And then step by step, more and more complex forms of matter prepared for the prokaryotes and the eukaryotes. In other words, those simple life forms that we looked at before. So in this view, you might say it is actually the evolution of consciousness that drives the history of the universe. And it is important because then everything, all life forms are part of some kind of a meaningful time plan. And of course, you know, some people would say that it's anathema to science to talk about a time plan because it could easily lead to the idea of a creator, which is not allowed, so to speak, in modern science. And, you know, however we conceive of that, I would say that we can't, you know, it's quite clear that we're actually living in the side of a time plan. And that time plan is essentially created by macrocosmic waves. And so here is a little bit how I conceive of consciousness as evolving and our concepts of time or any species, because consciousness existed already before the Big Bang, before any simple organism existed. But then it has developed and become more complex as new waves have been activated. And now we're on the human level, and there are many different levels of human consciousness that have been activated. But ultimately, it is as I see it, an invisible sphere that sort of gives, inside of which some kind of a neg entropy, some kind of order is created. And it evolves in time. The time and space is connected to this consciousness. And this is what, you know, it fits with the ancient traditions that talked about the origin of the universe in an old golden egg or something like that. Anyway, how am I on time? I don't have. Could you answer?
Carl, I think if you allow yourself another 10 minutes, because looking at your slide deck, it's just time to give people the full picture. So 10 more minutes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so how do modern science know about the Big Bang? Well, one reason is that the birth of the universe, so to speak. And one reason is that all the galaxies are moving away from each other. And so the implication is that they must have started in some common singularity. The other thing is the fact that this expansion has left an afterglow, which is called the cosmic microwave background radiation. And this is something that's been studied through a series of different satellites. And as you can see at the top of here, it's a picture of the entire universe. It's a whole cosmos, even though it may look like have this kind of oval form. And this is considered like a baby picture of the universe, created by the modern satellites that have been surveying the microcosmic, the cosmic background radiation. Now, in 2003, a new satellite was sent up, the WMAP satellite, and to monitor the afterglow of the Big Bang in order to see if there was any kind of abnormalities, anomalies in that oldest picture, so to speak. And what they found, and it's a long story, it was initially found by Max Tegmark at the MIT, who did some mathematical manipulations of this material, and found that at the very beginning there was a axis. If you look at the bottom picture there, I have placed, there is an axis, a straight line that goes through this pattern derived from the original Big Bang. And they decided to call this the axis of evil, because, you know, it didn't fit the accepted theories of science. It didn't fit the general theory of relativity and so forth. In other words, it seemed like there's been some kind of an axis, not a physical axis, but a straight line in the pattern of photons that came from the Big Bang. And so there must have existed at a very early point a kind of a axis in the universe. And how could that have existed when, you know, if it must have existed before the Big Bang actually took place. And what I've said here and interpreted that is that what they found and reconnected with, in a sense, is what the ancient people simply would call the tree of life, which is a line and connected geometries that organized the reality of our universe. And then it was criticized initially. People said that, oh, we can't trust this data because it doesn't fit what we have expected. But then they sent out a new satellite. They found the same thing. And then now recently they made some kind of a ground based studies that found the same thing. It's a reality. There is an axis from the very beginning of the universe. And what I'm suggesting is that this is the first structure you have in the universe. This is what started the creation of objects and distinct features of the universe. And without this axis, without the tree of life, that would never have emerged. And you know, then some scientists started to study the entire universe in various aspects, astronomical aspects, and found that you could actually, if you used that line separating the two hemispheres, you would actually get one side which had much more of these huge light sources called quasars, and then the other side. And so it looks like the entire universe. I repeat that. This picture is a picture of the entire universe, not just a simple galaxy or solar system. This is the entire universe. And then we find that there is a relationship also, which I find curious or interesting. There are 33 quasars on one side, 15 on the other side. And basically, this is the same relationship that in ancient traditions of China would talk about as the relationship between yang and yin, 2.25. So it seems like exactly what many ancient people would imply, that there is a cosmic axis that separates the yin and yang of the universe, and this is that's probably the most important feature of the whole universe. And then I go in to show how if you recall the pyramid of plumed serpent, the information ultimately came from the top of the pyramid, the house, the center of the universe. And it's the same way it works when it comes to the creation of the entire universe. The source is the cosmic center, the cosmic tree of life, and it's cross there, so to speak. And then information, creative information, trickles down through the galaxy, down to the solar system, the globe, and to ourselves. We are in resonance this. And this brings into a new phenomenon, quantum entanglement on a macrocosmic scale, which is really crucial for the development of the theories of my book. The different entities, the different holospheres of the universe are connected because they are entangled in the same way as we know from microcosmic quantum theory that photons and electrons are entangled over huge distances. It's the same thing. So what that means that it guarantees that the entire universe with its gazillion of galaxies and so forth are actually developing in synchrony because the different holons are entangled. And I talked about macrocosmic quantum theory, and one example that I gave is in the left-hand corner, the wave movement that created a number of species on our planet. But the interesting thing is that that wave movement that has a period of 124 million years, the solar system as it passes through the universe, through the galaxy, the solar system undergoes the same kind of periodicity, a wave movement of creation. And so in this sense, we can see that, we're really talking about macrocosmic quantum theory. This is just an example of it. But and we can see how the creation of different species are related to the positions that the solar system undergoes as it goes through the galaxy. And this leads us to another view of the galaxy. It's actually a nursery. It's really what is creating leading the solar systems to create planets that create different species that are organismic life. There are many different levels then. My book goes into details on how these different holons, how these different holospheric levels are connected. And it's not just this one, but this is a very telling aspect of it, how it's actually exists macrocosmic quantum waves that is behind the creation of life, exactly as the ancients would talk about the serpents as being the creators of life. But,
Carl, this is Christopher.
Yeah.
Now, everyone seems to be soaking up the information and there aren't many questions coming through. So I'm going to suggest you keep talking, but perhaps start to bring it to a peak in about 3 to 4 minutes, and then we'll come back for questions. Okay.
Okay, so, you might wonder, what are the connections then? And another aspect of the connections between the different levels is something that was discovered not so long ago, is that there is almost a complete identity of the structure between brain cells, how they are connected in a brain that you can see to the left here, and how the different galaxies are forming filaments in the universe. It's quite remarkable, really, when you look at this. If you're untrained, and I'm untrained at this, you can't really see the difference between these different structures, and yet the scale difference is 10 to the power of 27th. And this is, again, telling us something about how the different levels are connected. And ultimately, though, it is the holosphere, these spherical structures of consciousness that are connected through this macrocosmic entanglement. And yes, so I shall speed up a little bit and, just show here how the human brain has evolved from other brains, because it's becoming more and more spherical. And in order to become, and that more sphericity is really what allows it to be connected through macrocosmic entanglement, not only with the planet that you can see to the right there, but also with the higher levels of the universe up to the cosmos and the galaxy and the cosmos. And okay, so coming back now, we have now come to a point where we can see that the human brain is sort of what is receiving all this information. And it has the structure that it does with a pineal gland in the center that is sort of serves the fact that it is able to download higher states of consciousness that the previous animals could not do. And so that is what allows us to climb to the higher levels of the pyramid. And I already went through this and how we then for the past 100,000 years have gone through a sequence of different states of consciousness. And as you can see, I'm just giving one example here, how the state of consciousness, in other words, how we look out in the world, how we perceive the world, it determines, you might say, or at least conditions very strongly how we create our reality and how we create our relationships between ourselves, but also how we create our relationships to the divine. And so you can see roughly that there are each of these states of consciousness connects to or is related to a particular way in which we connect to the divine. And obviously the seventh wave here of industrialism is also the one of what created basically an atheist relationship, because it's a dark filter that covers. And all of this could be discussed in detail. But, these states of consciousness, the best source that we have is really to go to the ancient peoples again, because they gave information, and especially, all of them, they gave information of what the cosmic center, the cosmic holosphere, if you like, the cosmic holo was sending out, how that then was downloaded by human beings. And here you can see there is a difference in culture between how this geometry that was passed down from the cosmic center, how it looks from Mexico to China and Mesopotamia. But on the other hand, you can also see that they're all 8 partitioned. And you can also see that all symbols actually have a yin-yang duality in them. And the reason is really that, this is the kind of state of, it reflects this information that came from the cosmic center that the ancients were able to describe through these symbols. It actually then was downloaded onto the people, and that is how we have had our different states of mind, which are really aspects of this consciousness. And this has resulted in a wave movement of, starting with the first civilizations and going on to the present time. And the truth is that we are on a downward slope here. I've chosen here to maybe focus especially on the British Empire that, very clearly starts when the seventh day begins and goes up to a peak and then eventually goes down. And you would actually find many civilizations that are, this is a civilization of dominance, I should add here, because the duality makes people project dominance onto each other. And all of these various empires have really been based on sort of dominance of one over the other. And hopefully this is something we're moving on from today. I think I will cut it short. There are other, just to tell that it's more complex than just to say one particular wave going down. It's a mixture at the current time. And so there is a seventh wave that created industry and democracy and so forth. And we are actually out of that peak, and we will return only in 2031 to, I would say, what I expect more of an honoring of democracy and freedom than at the current time. And the eighth wave created a number of different things, the increase of women's role, digital revolution, and the rise of a new spirituality, and other things as well. And this is how complex it looks like at the current time if you look at all the different waves. The ninth wave is the top wave, has the highest frequency, and again it's really in principle always accessible, and here, I am showing, if you like to see it, how it applies to any particular day. This is today in the ninth wave. We happen to be in the very beginning of a new peak. And so this is a time where you could expect, especially for this peak, that you will be driven to do some actions that I would suggest are going in the direction of unity consciousness. But it goes up and down, and we have to learn how to deal with it. As I understand things, this is really what are the purpose of the universe is to go in that direction, find the tools to, and express that particular ninth wave in the most powerful ways. And so this is a picture of my book that told me to write this, that told me to write it, which remarkably happened in a short period of time of 3 months. And it's a fairly short book, 200 pages. And there's a long subtitle, Explaining Consciousness, the Big Bang, Fine-Tuning, Dark Matter, the Evolution of Life, and Human History. So it provides a sort of a unified picture of this that has been informed by ancient serpent worship, if you like. So thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Carl, thank you so much. It's wonderful to discover your half-life, which seems to be in your presentations about 1 hour. And so thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation. And there's a number of questions that have popped up. One about how the yin-yang dynamic and links to the two hemispheres of the human brain, which I think you've covered. And there's obviously questions that ask questions about how you relate to the work of Roger Penrose, for example, and his writing on the Emperor's New Mind. But where I want to go to in the concluding moments we have together is that there's a young man called Simon Diss, and he's written this in the chat for you. The truth is, I've had a personal interest in all this for 10 years plus. I've looked at the serpent and questioned the narrative in its entirety. I've got something funny to tell you, so I look forward to our conversation. But I want his book. I want to meet him. I want to narrate his audiobook, and I want to help propagate and further his work. So perhaps if we've achieved one thing today, we've set the scene for many more conversations and an explosion of explorations to many of the creative minds on this call. So what were you going to say, Carl?
Well, thank you. This is, the different yin-yang polarities. I'm not going to talk about how they are created, but if you look at it, sort of makes sense if you look at human history from the perspective of the different filters that you can see on the states of consciousness to the left there. It starts with the unity, and we have very little evidence of any kind of warfare if you go back further in time than the first civilizations, as an example of unity. And as far as we know, people lived in some kind of a shamanic state of unity, and did not seek to dominate nature as later happened with the religions that came with the first civilizations 5,000 years ago. And you may notice then that with that particular duality, light falls on the left brain half. And what that means is that that's the brain half that's responsible for writing and reading and so forth. And so scriptural religions came out very much of this particular state of consciousness, and also very much religions that actually tended to further the kind of dominance that was typical of the empires that were created by this wave. And then it shifts so that the atheists, they become a dark filter, and no sort of, at least there is a sort of shutting out of a lot of the divine light. But then it shifts back in the eighth wave to one where the light comes into the right brain half. And so this becomes much more of a feminine era, and it becomes a era of spirituality that is not scriptural. It's essentially experiential, and it's not based on just one belief. Modern people that's influenced by this state of consciousness are essentially eclectic and pick and choose and take what they make up to themselves. But the point is that this is not a scriptural kind of spirituality. It's an experiential one. And then the highest level is one that brings us into unity, back to unity. And I could go on. This is covered in many of my earlier books, and I could go on forever. But I think it's quite clear and enough in this book to demonstrate that yes, there is such a thing as different states of mind that is activated at these different points in time, and it is. Those states of mind are based on shifting polarities from the cosmic source. So we're all part of, whether we like it or not, we're part of this cosmic plan.
So Carl, I can't thank you enough. And the slide you were just showing just highlights that the time that you and I met was at the start of the eighth wave. And there seems to be a 10-year gap then till 2011. And we're now in 2022. And I'm wondering what we're responding to as we all come together on this call. And certainly looking at the range of names on this call here, there are many individuals who I believe will take what you've offered and take it further. But obviously, it may well be that we need to organise further conversations and bring in other voices that have been looking at this patterning of the universe over the last 20, 30 years. And Howard Bloom, I believe, has voiced the discipline that allows us to bring together these many views, especially the work of yourself, and it would equate to a new discipline, the discipline of omnology, the studying of the many sciences and many points of views to bring to synthesize new interpretations. So I can't thank you enough, and I can't thank you all for being on this call. The recording will be circulated to you all, and somewhere in the chat, Sheila did put the link to Carl's book. and certainly to help him on his way, but also to have something by your bedside table, on your bedside table, that keeps you inspired and perhaps invites you to catch your next wave. I certainly do recommend that you get hold of a copy of Carl's book. So thank you all, and thank you, Sheila, for helping us organize this. And again, thank you, Carl, for allowing us to drag you out of bed so early in the morning whilst we enjoy the cold afternoon and looking at the spread of people on the call here. We've got East and West and people bridging around the world. So thank you.
Thank you very much.